It's Dave with Taboo Customs. This video today we are going to be pulling out a 231 transfer case out of this 95 Jeep Cherokee here behind me. Now this transfer case removal will apply to pretty much most of the Cherokees. Actually, a lot of it will also apply to Wranglers and the YJs and the TJs, because they did use a lot of similar designs up through the years. But obviously with the Wranglers, you're going to run into a few different things. We will also, while we're pulling this out, cover some tips for installation where we see those. So let's get started. All right, so we've got the Jeep raised up on jack stands now. We've gone ahead and we've drained the transfer case. The first step we're going to do is remove the disconnect the linkage from up here, about midway up on the driver's side of the transmission. We'll try to get up in there to see it. We've got basically a real long flat screwdriver. We're going to stick it up in there, just basically pry over on it. What it is that is just a rod that pushes into a plastic bushing on there. So you're just pulling it out of that plastic bushing. Now we're doing that so that we can now shift this transfer case down here, because what we're going to want to do when we remove the rear drive shafts, put it in neutral so we can rotate that rear drive shaft to get to all the bolts. All right, so we shifted the transfer case to neutral by pulling the lever on the transfer case to the rear a few clicks, basically until you can rotate the rear drive shaft. So now what we've got is we've got a 1/4-inch socket, some extensions, and we've got a 1/4-inch drive socket. It's actually 8mm, and what we do recommend for these bolts back here is use a 6-point socket, not a 12-point socket, because they can sometimes want to round off if you use a 12-point socket. But we should be able to just pull all these out. You're also going to want to have your large screwdriver set somewhere right here on hand so that we can pull this out. All right, once we have the caps off, we're going to use our screwdriver, pry on it, see if we can get it out. Alright, now make sure you hold on to the caps. These are pretty well worn in, so that it's not going anywhere. And it will basically just pull to the rear. Now, since this is a 95, it has a slip yoke where, you know, this slides up into the transfer case. Now if you have a 96 and newer, you're going to have one that's a little different. It'll have a boot over it. If you have that, it's pretty similar. You may though just need to give it a little yank to get that boot to pop over the piece that it's attached to. But do make sure, because this is where your seal rides, so don't damage that surface there if you plan on reusing this. Alright, so for our next step, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we are going to take the bolts off of the transmission mount to the cross member here, because before we pull this front drive shaft out, I actually like to get this cross member out of the way. It's a little bit easier. So there should be 4 bolts. Now we have ran into cases where sometimes they will break off, so you may have less. On this Jeep here, these are 13mm. And you can remove these bolts without worries of the transmission falling on you, because it is sitting on this cross member. But in the next step, we'll want to support the transmission. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to support the transmission. I'm actually going to go ahead and raise the transmission up a bit, just to make sure that I'm disconnected from the cross member. So we're using basically a block of wood to support across the transmission. Jack it up until basically until the mount comes out of the cross member. So now transmission should be fully supported by the jack. We can go ahead and remove the cross member. All right, so now we're ready to remove the cross member. For that, it typically needs a 15mm socket. Now, you might run into what we've got here, and you can see with this cross member, it's not actually fully bolted in. There was only 2 bolts holding it in because they'd already broken off the 2 here, one on each side. You may run into that in your own Jeep. If you do plan on, you know, reinstalling in this same vehicle, you can try drilling these out. We will often try welding a nut to the top of the bolt, trying to get it out that way. One thing you could also try is before you put a pipe on it and break it off, is we will use an induction heater and actually put it on there and heat the bolt up red hot, try to get it to break its seal inside that nut. However, the issue, like with a lot of these, if you can see it, like this was one from the other side of this Jeep, that's not supposed to be a needle point bolt, so they just rust up in there and they will break off. What you can also do is go in there and cut a hole out, make a plate, put a plate up there, new nut. We've had to do that sometimes, but like I said, 15mm socket. Hopefully it comes off nice for you. Now, a couple of them might be studs and a couple of them might be bolts. Depends how it's probably gone for other people. Okay, so now we're getting ready to work on the front drive shaft here. We're actually going to go ahead though and pull this linkage the rest of the way off. Got our big screwdriver again. We'll kind of stick it in there and use this for leverage and just pop it out of, again, the same sort of scenario where it just slides into a plastic bushing up in there. So now for this front drive shaft, unfortunately you can't get our impact on it, so we've got an 8mm end wrench and our big flat screwdriver. Screwdriver is going to be to hold the drive shaft while we break the bolts loose. And again, this is a situation where it'd be nice to have a 6-point end wrench. I grabbed a 12-point. You saw what happened. Alright, we couldn't find our 8mm 6-point end wrench, so what we had to do is, you can't really fit a 1/4-inch drive ratchet up in here, so we've got a little 1/4-inch drive breaker bar. We can at least get these broke loose, and then we can use that open end of the end wrench to do the rest of it. Maybe it will break loose. Oh crap. Alright, camera died on me there. So these are long-winded bolts, so they will take a bit to get out. Make sure as you get the last one out though that you still have your screwdriver close by. Okay, the last one out, we can now pry this out of the yoke. And then if you are putting the transfer case back in it, of course you just leave it in it, but this Jeep is getting scrapped. So we're going to go ahead and just pull that whole drive shaft off the front as well, just like we did at the rear. All right, now we'll go ahead and we'll pull off the transmission mount. There should be 2 bolts, 18mm socket, one on either side here. Now, some Jeeps, you may be able to get this plate that holds the exhaust off. Ours, though, we are not going to be able to get it off of there, so it's going to be in the way the whole time, so that's not going to be a whole lot of fun. But that's the way things go. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead, we're going to lower our jack to bring the transfer case down. Then we'll go ahead, we'll disconnect. There'll be two electrical connectors. There'll be one right back here. If I can get the camera right. Up here for the speedometer. And then one right up. Right up in there. Sorry for the shoddy camera work. I'm now dragging around a battery pack because my batteries keep dying. Okay, along with this connector up here that we're going to disconnect, we also have to take off the vent hose. Some of these will have these types of crimped clamps, which is a pain in the butt. We're going to try to stick a screwdriver in there, work it back and forth, loosen it up, pull that off. Some will have a spring clamp that you can actually put a wrench or put a pair of pliers on to get it loose and get it off. So we'll get that off, and then we'll basically start working on removing all of the bolts here that hold the transfer case on. That honestly is probably the biggest pain in the butt of this whole process. All right, before we get to the next step, we're going to show it to you here on the bench. This is actually a different 231. This next step will be removing the nuts on each of these studs here. There'll be 6 of them. Usually there'll be one here. Now in this case, you see where the stud actually came out of the transfer case. This is possible, but not usually what happens. Usually you just pull the nuts off there. Each one of these will be a little bit difficult to get to. We'll show you some tools that we have that will help us, and we'll try to give you some pointers as well as we work through that. All right, so we're starting here on the driver's side, and the first one we're going to pull off is the one that's inside of this hole here. This one and the one on the bottom is one of the only two that you can really get a full size end wrench on. Now it will help. We're actually going to drop the transmission down as much as we can to be able to allow us enough space between the body to get up to these. That'll be really important on all of the rest of them. These two here, not so important. Now this bottom one here, we're going to loosen it up, but we're going to leave that one to last. So that one is the easiest to get to, and when we get something to support the transfer case and we've got all the rest off, we'll go ahead and pull that one off. But these two, pretty much just use your end wrench and you should be able to get to them. Now a lot of them, just like this one in this hole, you're going to want a 12-point end wrench because you're going to have to go tooth by tooth with a lot of these. All right, I failed to mention this, but these nuts that are on here, and this is what they will look like, these will be 9/16. So they're not metric. Cherokees have a habit of being half metric, half standard, which is just wonderful. But yes, these are 9/16 nuts, so you will need 9/16 wrenches and whatnot for this. All right, so now we're on the passenger side. We're going to talk about the other 4 nuts, and these are a little bit more difficult, and we'll show you some techniques we use for getting these. But first, let's take a look at what we actually typically use. Now we have a 9/16 end wrench that we cut off short, and this has been cut off like this for a long time because it's specifically made for getting these transfer cases out. We'll also use this curved 9/16 end wrench as well, and then we have a regular, but really at this point it's hard to get this regular length end wrench up in there, so we'll show you what we do to typically get these loose, a lot of times using this smaller, shorter end wrench. All right, so the technique we're going to use, we're going to show it on this bottommost one because once we get up here to the next couple, it's going to be hard to see it. Now remember that there is a stud back here in this little valley here. If you look on the transfer case, you'll see a rib. Each of those ribs, there's a stud there, so you're going to need to make sure you get all 6 off. So we're going to take our little shorty end wrench, get it on that. Then what we have is we actually have a slide hammer with an end on here, just enough to basically kind of hook onto that end wrench, and then we're going to yank that down until we can do it by hand. And typically once you break them loose, it's not too difficult to get the nut the rest of the way out. It can be a little long-winded, and especially if the stud comes out of the transfer case, it can be a bit more of a pain in the butt, but usually this works. We'll actually do this for this one here, for the next one, and then probably also the one on top. And then the one that's farther over is a little bit more difficult, the one that's on the driver's side top. That's where we'll typically go in with this curved wrench and get that, but you can get in there and sometimes get it with a little shorty, but it's really kind of a pain in the butt. All right, so the last one we're going to talk about is this one on the upper driver's side. So the last one we have other than the bottom bolt to get out. So we're on the driver's side now. We'll show you another trick if you don't have one of those curved wrenches. So we've got our short 9/16. We're going to put it on there, and it's pretty much straight up and down. And then what we're going to use is we've actually got a 5/8 end wrench that has, you know, the bend on the end of it. We're going to go from the passenger side, go over that 9/16 on the end. It'll be hard to see probably. I'll try to get it lined up and then I'll show you. And you essentially, oops, sorry, kind of like that. And so now what we're doing is we're over here without a light. So now we're able to pull down on that 5/16 end wrench and basically do similar to what that curved wrench does. And you have to get it kind of just right. The longer the wrench, the easier it is, the more leverage you'll have, but it will work. Hopefully it doesn't need it again. All right, now for the final step here, we've got a transmission jack, but you may end up with a regular jack. The main thing is, you know, don't let it fall on you. So we've loosened up the bottom bolt. Luckily that one typically is pretty easy to come off because it's pretty well protected. Now we've got a long screwdriver. We're just going to work on separating them out. Probably the biggest thing is not pinching yourself. So we'll slide it backwards and just about lose it. There we go. All right, now make sure that the wiring harness, there will be a little tab that's on top that the wiring harness goes into. You might have to pull that out. There you have it. All right, so there you have it, the removal of the 231 from the Jeep Cherokee here. Not the cleanest of jobs, depending on, you know, the Cherokee that you've got, but something that is pretty easily doable if you're willing to sacrifice the 9/16 end wrench, that is. So anyway, thank you for watching. As always, your like, subscribe is greatly appreciated, and be sure to visit taboocustoms.com for rust repair parts and Jeep products and other things we have available for sale there.